My name is Sarah Jenkins, and I am 53 years old. I've lived in Cape May, New Jersey my whole life, rooted here like one of the old lighthouse keepers. My world is usually a quiet one, filled with the salty air off the Atlantic and the gentle hum of my antique shop, Coastal Keepsakes, right near the historic district. People know me for my calm demeanor, a steady hand that can mend a broken tea set or calm a frazzled tourist. But beneath that calm, there's a quiet strength, a fierce love for this town and its traditions, and for the things I hold dear. One of those things is my beautiful vintage 1970 Triumph Bonneville motorcycle named Betsy. She's not just a bike, she's a piece of history, a rumble of nostalgia, and my escape on those rare days when the shop is closed and the weather's just right. Betsy has a dedicated spot, a little corner by the side of my shop just big enough for her, marked with a small hand-painted sign that says "Motorcycle parking only please." It's been there for 30 years, a quiet agreement with the town, a small courtesy to a local business owner. Most folks respect it. They know it's for me, for Betsy, a part of the fabric of this place. But not everyone. This summer, a new kind of visitor rolled into Cape May. She called herself Brittany, a woman perhaps half my age, with an expensive, gleaming white sport utility vehicle that looked utterly out of place on our cobblestone streets. She rented one of the historic homes down the street, an enormous place, and from day one she exuded an air of entitlement that grated on everyone's nerves. Brittany didn't just visit Cape May. She seemed to conquer it, her loud phone calls echoing through quiet streets, her flashy clothes an insult to our understated charm. My problem started simple enough. One sunny Tuesday, I arrived at my shop to find Brittany's enormous sport utility vehicle parked directly over my motorcycle parking only sign, completely blocking Betsy's spot. There was plenty of other parking, metered spots, pay lots, but she chose mine. I sighed, took a deep breath, and decided to handle it gracefully. I was unsatisfied with the blatant disrespect for something so clearly marked, and for a local resident's long-standing arrangement. Brittany, with her designer sunglasses and air of superiority, had become my nemesis. I started making polite efforts to solve the problem. The first time, I wrote a small, friendly note on a piece of nice stationery from my shop, explaining that the spot was reserved for my motorcycle and kindly asking her to move. I tucked it under her windshield wiper. When I returned an hour later after a quick errand, the note was crumpled on the ground next to her tire, and her vehicle was still there. I swallowed my frustration. The next day, it happened again. This time, I waited. When Brittany eventually emerged from her rented house, chatting loudly on her phone, I approached her, a gentle smile on my face. "Excuse me, I'm Sarah Jenkins from Coastal Keepsakes," I began, gesturing towards my shop. "I wonder if you'd mind moving your car from that spot. It's actually reserved for my motorcycle." Brittany barely glanced at me, her eyes still fixed on her phone. "Oh, that old thing," she said with a dismissive wave towards Betsy, who was then parked a little further down the street. "Look, parking is impossible here. I need a convenient spot. It's just a bike." She then turned her back to me and continued her conversation. My heart sank. It wasn't just about parking anymore. It was about her complete disregard for my property, my business, and me. I tried speaking to the local parking enforcement officers, explaining the situation. They were sympathetic, but their hands were tied. "It's not technically an official handicapped spot, Sarah," Officer Miller explained regretfully. "We can't tow unless it's blocking a driveway or fire lane. It's more of a courtesy spot." My problem began to grow bigger and more serious. Brittany continued to park in my spot day after day, sometimes for hours, sometimes overnight. She seemed to enjoy the defiance of it. Once I found a small, fresh scratch on Betsy's chrome headlight, a telltale sign of a hurried, careless maneuver by a large sport utility vehicle. My beautiful Betsy, my reliable companion, now bore a wound because of this woman's arrogance. The stakes were getting higher. It wasn't just an inconvenience, it was a personal attack on my prized possession. I even considered getting rid of Betsy, selling her to someone who could keep her safe from this relentless disrespect. The thought brought tears to my eyes. How could I let someone drive me away from a passion I'd cherished for decades? I felt completely defeated, like an old wave being pushed back by the relentless tide of modern entitlement. One particularly bad morning, I found a parking ticket on Betsy's handlebars. Brittany's sport utility vehicle was parked squarely in my spot, and because of how she positioned it, Betsy, forced to park a little further down in what usually counted as a loading zone, had been ticketed for being in an unauthorized space. It was a clear act of malice, a twisted manipulation of the rules. All was lost, I thought. My own town, my own cherished bike, and I was being punished while the real offender walked free. I felt a cold knot of despair in my stomach. Brittany even had the audacity to smirk at me from her porch as I pulled the ticket off Betsy's handle. That smirk, that utter lack of remorse, hardened something inside me. It was then I knew I couldn't give up. That night, as the Cape May lighthouse swept its beam across the dark ocean, I sat in my workshop, staring at Betsy. I ran my hand over her cool metal. Memories from decades ago, from my youth, started to flood back. I remembered riding a feisty two-stroke Yamaha RD350LC back in my 20s. The way it would cough out thick, oily smoke on a cold start if you choked it just right and opened the throttle. A mischievous glint sparked in my eye. Betsy, a four-stroke engine, wasn't a smoker like the old RD, but she was a classic, a machine with character, and I knew her quirks better than anyone. I thought about the time my old mechanic, Sal, showed me a trick to prime her for a really strong start, one that would sometimes send a puff of rich, dark exhaust if you weren't careful. It wasn't something you did often, but it was possible. I decided then and there that I would make a final, last-ditch effort. It wouldn't be violent, it wouldn't be destructive, but it would be memorable. It would be poetic. The next morning, a Saturday, the height of the tourist season, Brittany once again parked her gleaming white sport utility vehicle directly in my spot. She had left her driver's side window down a few inches, no doubt to air out the vehicle after one of her many trips to the beach. As I walked towards my shop, I saw her, perched on the porch of her rental, sipping a fancy coffee, completely oblivious, scrolling through her phone. This was my moment. I dug deep, summoning that youthful defiance from my memory. I pushed Betsy, rolling her quietly into position, maneuvering her until her twin exhaust pipes were pointing straight at Brittany's slightly open driver's window. My heart pounded in my chest. I carefully opened the fuel petcock, checked the choke, and then, using the little trick Sal had shown me years ago, I primed Betsy's engine a bit more than usual, flooding the carburetor just slightly. I leaned in, put my foot on the kickstarter, and with a single mighty kick, Betsy roared to life. Instead of her usual clean rumble, a thick, rich cloud of dark, unburnt, fuel-laced smoke erupted from her pipes. I held the throttle open, just as I remembered doing with the RD, and Betsy responded with a deep, smoky growl, spewing a continuous stream of that acrid, oily-smelling exhaust directly into Brittany's luxury vehicle. The smoke filled the interior, a pungent, choking cloud that lingered, clinging to the leather seats, the expensive fabrics, the very air inside. Brittany, startled by the sudden noise, dropped her phone. She gasped, coughing, her face twisting in disgust as she rushed over. "What in the world are you doing, you crazy old woman?" she shrieked, waving her hands frantically at the cloud now billowing from her open window. I just held the throttle steady, a small, knowing smile playing on my lips until the exhaust cleared and Betsy settled into a more normal, though still satisfyingly loud, idle. The damage was done. Brittany's expensive sport utility vehicle, her symbol of superiority, now smelled like an old mechanic's garage after a particularly rough tune-up, a stench that would cling and persist like a ghost. The consequences were indeed poetic. Brittany tried everything. I saw her at the car wash, then at a professional detailer, then leaving her car with the windows open for hours. But the smell of rich, oily exhaust, a persistent, embarrassing reminder of that smoky morning, simply would not leave her expensive vehicle. It permeated everything. She couldn't stand to drive it, complaining loudly to anyone who would listen about the unexplained, horrible smell. The parking spot by my shop, it remained empty. Brittany eventually stopped parking there. In fact, she seemed to avoid that side of the street entirely. She left Cape May a few weeks later, earlier than her rental agreement suggested, her shiny sport utility vehicle still emitting faint, embarrassing whiffs of my revenge. I heard through the local grapevine that she tried to sell the car quickly, but buyers kept complaining about the unusual odor. My beautiful Betsy, meanwhile, hummed along perfectly, her engine purring like a contented cat. The parking spot was once again my peaceful domain. I felt a quiet satisfaction, a deep fulfillment that wasn't about anger but about justice. It was about standing up for myself and for the respectful rhythm of our small town. I continued running coastal keepsakes, my days a little brighter, my spirit a little stronger. People in town would sometimes nod at me with a knowing smile, occasionally asking, "Everything all right with your parking these days, Sarah?" And I would just smile back, a secret triumph in my eyes. My new normal was knowing that sometimes the quietest people have the loudest solutions. And as for Brittany, well, a few months later, a customer came into my shop, chuckling about a story she'd heard from a friend in Florida. Apparently, a woman she knew had bought a luxury sport utility vehicle secondhand from a seller who had recently moved from New Jersey, only to discover it had a stubborn, inexplicable, and utterly foul odor that just wouldn't go away. The customer was thinking of returning the car. I just smiled, polished a silver locket, and hummed a little tune, the salty Cape May air smelling wonderfully fresh.